It was a routine patrol mission for the U.S. Navy's Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the USS John Finn, DDG-113, cruising steadily through international waters in the South China Sea, when all hell nearly broke loose. What started as a calculated show of force quickly escalated into one of the tensest confrontations between Chinese and American forces in recent years. And it all unfolded with a thunderous roar just miles on the ship's deck, as a Chinese J-16 fighter jet, armed to the teeth with air-to-air missiles, streaked through the sky, diving far too low and far too close, cutting across the destroyer's path in a maneuver so reckless, so aggressive, that it left every sailor on board stunned and battle stations lit in seconds. The kind of moment where split-second decisions mean life or death, diplomacy or disaster, peace or fireball over the Pacific. Because this wasn't just another flyby. This was an act of sheer intimidation, a brazen flex by Beijing, and it was answered with steel nerves and raw American resolve. Inside the USS John Finn's Combat Information Center, radar officers tracked the jet's descent as it broke the 1,000 feet threshold, swooping within 150 yards of the vessel at near supersonic speed, prompting immediate electronic countermeasures, defensive posturing, and stern radio hails that were completely ignored. Unidentified aircraft. This is a United States Navy warship conducting lawful operations in international waters. Your actions are unsafe and unprofessional. Turn away immediately. But the PLA pilot didn't flinch. Instead, he banked hard to port, swung around like a hawk, and made a second pass even lower, triggering the USS John Finn to raise its alert level to Condition 1. Weapons crews locking in, phalanx CIWS rotating, ready to obliterate any incoming missile or threat if a single wrong move was made, as the deck crew scrambled with binoculars and digital scopes, verifying payloads and checking for signs of hostile intent, while back in the engine room, sailors worked in silence, knowing full well that one false signal could mean all-out war. Washington was notified within minutes. The incident streamed live via encrypted SATCOM to the Pentagon, where top brass huddled around digital maps and thermal video footage, weighing the consequences of a confrontation that could ignite the region. But here's where things get even more intense. What Beijing didn't expect was that the U.S. had an ace in the sky, a pair of F/A-18 Super Hornets launched from a nearby carrier strike group, already en route and closing fast, armed with AIM-120 AMRAAMs and ready to intercept. The message was clear. Mess with the U.S. Navy, and you'll get an answer from a U.S. air wing. And as those twin jets roared overhead, flanking the Chinese intruder like wolves guarding the pack, the tone changed immediately. The J-16 pulled up sharply, retreated east at full afterburner, and radioed a terse retreat message in Mandarin intercepted by U.S. intel units, translating roughly to returning to base. But the damage was done. The footage captured by sailors and satellite surveillance was all the proof needed. China had crossed the line again, dangerously close to triggering an international crisis, and the world was watching. Within 24 hours, headlines exploded. Too close to comfort. Chinese jet buzzes U.S. warship. Pentagon condemns dangerous maneuver. And diplomats scrambled. UN briefings held. And the Department of Defense issued a firm warning to the PLA. We will not be coerced. Our ships will sail wherever international law allows. Period. But why would China pull such a move now? Analysts point to rising tensions over Taiwan, aggressive South China Sea claims, and recent U.S. joint drills with regional allies as likely triggers. Beijing was sending a message, but so was the U.S., one backed by 9,000-ton steel destroyers, carrier strike groups, and unmatched air dominance. For the sailors aboard the John Finn, the experience was a stark reminder that at any moment, freedom of navigation can become a fight for survival, and every deployment carries a shadow of confrontation. But it also underscored one irrefutable truth. America's military is ready, disciplined, and unshaken. Every radar ping, every engine hum, every trained eye and steady hand aboard that destroyer proved once again that the U.S. Navy isn't just floating steel, it's a floating fortress of freedom. And if any adversary dares to test that resolve, the consequences could be catastrophic. As for the Chinese jet, it never returned, and the John Finn sailed on undaunted, unbent, and undeterred, its flag flapping high under the Pacific sun, a symbol of strength and defiance in dangerous waters. Because when a Chinese fighter jet gets too close to a U.S. Navy destroyer, the whole world pays attention. And that day, it wasn't just a near miss, it was a warning shot across the bow of global diplomacy. And the United States answered with power, precision, and absolute dominance in the sky and at sea. But the real story wasn't just in the skies or aboard the steel decks of the USS John Finn. It was in the ripple effect that tore through every corridor of military command, every back-channel diplomatic line, and every strategic nerve center stretching from the Pentagon to Pearl Harbor to Pacific Command. Because what happened next revealed just how close the world had come to a flashpoint in the Indo-Pacific, and how seriously the United States was prepared to act. Within hours of the incident, Pacific Fleet Command activated additional reconnaissance missions, deploying MQ-4 Sea Triton drones equipped with the most advanced ISR capabilities on the planet, giving U.S. naval intelligence a hawk's eye view over contested waters, while E-2D Hawkeye aircraft swept the region with radar coverage so broad it could track a fishing boat from 200 miles out, and while the Chinese J-16 was already back in Hangzhou or wherever it came from, U.S. analysts were busy dissecting every frame, every maneuver, every altitude shift of the flyby, building a complete threat profile to update the National Reconnaissance Office's real-time red alert database. This wasn't just about one jet. This was about patterns, about probing weaknesses, and Beijing had made a bold but dangerous gamble, thinking the U.S. would flinch, hesitate, or downplay the incident. But that's not how the United States rolls. Within 36 hours, the USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group had altered course, moving closer to the area, joined by an Australian Hobart-class destroyer and a Japanese Kongo-class guided missile destroyer, forming a tri-national defensive perimeter that sent a crystal-clear message across the Pacific. This ocean is not yours, and the West will not be bullied. In Washington, Secretary of Defense briefed the National Security Council, laying out satellite-confirmed evidence of the Chinese jet's breach of international safety protocol, with visual markers showing the aircraft's dangerously low trajectory and near-miss path of the destroyer, and the president himself authorized a direct military-to-military call with Beijing, demanding explanations. China, of course, denied everything, claiming the U.S. ship was operating too close to Chinese territory, conveniently ignoring the fact that it was a full 120 nautical miles from any claimed landmass, firmly within international waters. But denials weren't enough to stop the U.S. response. At the White Sands Missile Range, a simulated combat drill was launched, replicating the exact threat profile of the J-16 flyby, with F-35B Lightning IIs practicing evasive maneuvers, live firing AM-9X sidewinders, and conducting precision lock-ons under electronic warfare conditions, preparing pilots for future encounters that might not end with just a retreat. Meanwhile, news networks around the globe buzz with headlines. Red line in the Pacific, close call at sea, new Cold War in the South China Sea. But while the media speculated, the Pentagon strategized, knowing full well that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in great power competition. And it wasn't going to be won by words or headlines, but by readiness, resilience, and resolve. For the men and women aboard the John Finn, the next 72 hours were spent in high alert status, systems fully operational, watches doubled, air surveillance intensified as they continued to patrol, not because they were told to, but because that's what American sailors do. They finish the mission, no matter the threat, no matter the provocation, because freedom of the seas isn't just a phrase. It's a responsibility etched into every hull and every heartbeat of the U.S. Navy. And while China may have tried to show its teeth, it only exposed its recklessness. And in doing so, it awakened a force far more disciplined, far more capable, and far more united than it could have imagined. Because across the Pacific, in bases from Guam to Yokosuka to San Diego, U.S. service members were not shaken. They were focused, drilling harder, flying faster, and pushing the limits of American military innovation. And just days later, a joint exercise dubbed Pacific Resolve was launched, involving over 40 ships, 200 aircraft, and 20,000 personnel from 5 allied nations, all conducting live-fire scenarios, air defense coordination, and electronic warfare jamming against simulated Chinese aggression. Every missile launched, every sortie flown, every maneuver performed a message in itself. The United States will not stand down, will not step back, and will not let hostile flybys go unanswered. But what about that pilot? The one who flew the J-16 too close? Intelligence sources believe he's a high-ranking PLA Air Force captain, trained in aggressive interception doctrine. Part of a growing fleet of pilots encouraged to challenge the Americans in the air, but challenge doesn't mean dominate. And if he had made one miscalculation, it had veered just a little closer or flashed a weapons lock, there's no doubt the USS John Finn would have lit the sky with a defensive wall of 20mm Vulcan rounds and surface-to-air missiles that would have turned that fighter jet into a flaming wreck in seconds, because the U.S. rules of engagement are clear. De-escalation when possible, lethal response when necessary, and that's not a bluff, that's doctrine. And so, while the ship eventually resumed normal operations, logging its encounter and sharing its data with allied navies, the legacy of that moment lived on, not just in the files of intelligence analysts, but in the sharpened alertness of every U.S. destroyer now operating in contested regions, where the skies are no longer just blue, they're full of shadows of drones, fighters, and ambitions colliding at Mach speeds. And yet through it all, the U.S. Navy remains calm, composed, and committed, a symbol of peace through strength, a shield against chaos, and a clear reminder that when adversaries test America's resolve, whether by jet, ship, or submarine, they're not just poking at metal, they're confronting the full force of a nation that never backs down, never breaks, and always defends what's right. So the next time a Chinese fighter jet gets too close to a U.S. Navy warship, the world might want to hold its breath. Because the last time it happened, war was a hair trigger away, and next time, it might not end with flyby. It might end with fire. And now, as the dust settles and the waves calm, the question isn't whether the world just dodged a bullet. It's how close that bullet came to rewriting history, because this wasn't some fluke incident or pilot error. This was a calculated pressure point by China's military playbook, a test of willpower carried out with titanium wings and a cockpit full of arrogance. And if there's one thing the United States has learned from decades of global command, it's that every test must be met with strength, not just a firepower, but a strategy of alliances and of resolve. And that's exactly what unfolded behind the scenes after the near collision over the South China Sea. U.S. Indo-Pacific Command immediately convened high-level briefings involving cyber units, space-based surveillance, and naval operations teams to cross-check data from the USS John Finn with satellite telemetry, signals intelligence from RC-135 Rivet Joint Aircraft, and undersea sonar arrays listening for PLA, submarine activity. And what they found was chilling. China wasn't just flying close. It was coordinating signals, probing, tracking U.S. shipping missions, attempting to learn the destroyer's electronic signature in a clear violation of maritime peace norms, essentially sniffing out vulnerabilities that could be exploited in a future engagement. But America wasn't just watching, it was responding. Under Operation Sentinel Horizon, U.S. forces deployed advanced radar spoofing measures and signal obfuscation tech to throw off any hostile data collection, while launching Lockheed U, 2 Dragon Lady missions from Guam to collect ultra-high altitude imagery of Chinese bases on Hainan Island. And at sea, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Preble joined the John Finn, doubling defensive layers and enabling cooperative target acquisition, creating a no-fly bubble around U.S. operations so tight that even birds had to file flight plans. Back in Washington, the Pentagon activated Joint Task Force Valiant Shield, issuing contingency orders to forces in Alaska, Hawaii, and the Philippines, preparing for multiple combat simulations across 5 domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. And when the president addressed the nation from the East Room of the White House, he didn't mince words, stating with clarity and force, "Let it be known, any threat to U.S. naval vessels is a threat to U.S. sovereignty. We will not hesitate to act." Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, bipartisan leaders demanded stronger naval posture in the Pacific, fast-tracking funding for the deployment of new F/AXX 6th-generation stealth fighters, hypersonic-capable Tomahawk replacements, and more forward-deployed submarines in key strategic lanes. This wasn't just a show of strength. It was a foundation of future deterrence. Because if China wanted to gamble with global stability, the U.S. would make sure the stakes were too high to bear. And across the Pacific Rim, American allies didn't sit idle. Japan scrambled F-15JS from Na Air Base in solidarity flights over disputed zones. Australia's P-8 8A Poseidon aircraft flew coordinated maritime patrols near Taiwan, and the United Kingdom, not to be left behind, deployed HMS Queen Elizabeth alongside U.S. carrier groups in a rare but powerful transoceanic display of unity. Even India, often cautious in its regional maneuvers, conducted joint anti-submarine warfare drills with the U.S. Navy, marking a subtle but unmistakable message to Beijing. The world is watching, and it stands with freedom of navigation. But perhaps the greatest show of strength came not from the hardware, but from the hearts of the American sailors who stood watch that day, who stayed calm under pressure, who carried out their duties with the discipline of warriors and the courage of giants. Because a real deterrent isn't just what flies or sails. It's the spirit of those who serve, who stand between chaos and order, who uphold the values that define a nation built on liberty, justice, and unwavering strength. And so, while the Chinese jet eventually disappeared over the horizon, its reckless dive into American airspace left behind more than just a trail of jet fumes. It ignited a global reminder that the U.S. Navy is not to be tested lightly, and that for every close pass, there are consequences that ripple through oceans and echo through diplomatic halls, and as the sun sets over the Pacific once more, casting golden light across the decks of America's destroyers, the message remains as clear as ever. These waters may be vast, but they are watched, defended, and protected by the mightiest maritime force the world has ever known, and any adversary thinking play games at sea should remember. A mistake against the U.S. Navy isn't just a bad decision, it's a big mistake, and the next one might be your last.